Good evening, everyone. This evening, I want to cover a very popular story, or stories rather, because this has been popularized for quite some time. It's kind of like hidden history within the Black community that needs to be revealed over and over again, especially as we are demanding reparations for our forefathers and our ancestors had went through in this country. And we still have people within our own community, meaning Black people, Black Americans, foundational Black Americans. We have some people who are very resistant, very revoking, refuting reparations. And if you don't know your history, then you probably don't understand why we are actually owed reparation and that we should be demanding reparation at all times. And this is one of those stories that really should be validation. It should be proof of Black people organizing, unifying, and going out and building great things, building towns and cities, and having the Black American dollar to circulate through the community 4 and 6, 7 times. That there was not only one Tulsa, Oklahoma, Black Wall Street, but there were many. And we won't necessarily cover the Black Wall Streets, but some of these cities we're going to cover not only was part of Red Summer of 1919, when sailors came back from World War One, and some incidents were occurring in these majority Black cities. Now, when these guys came back home, so did the Black soldiers, and it was not readily acceptable in neighborhoods that they wanted to move in, places they wanted to work at. It was very difficult for them. So they was given to what seemed to be orchestrated demonstrations from the dominant society at the time in order to bring up claims and false allegations against Black people to justify the murder, killing, lynching, burning their homes, and putting their towns and cities underwater. See, it's kind of like we just popularized certain people within the Black community, like a Martin Luther King. But there was other people who was pivotal to civil rights and a lot of the legislation that got passed in order for things to perceive or assume to be equal. No one talks about Francis Cress Welsing and the ISIS paper, how pivotal that was to educate Black men and women about the atrocities of this country, but the way they think about white annihilation through Black sperm, stuff like that. The ISIS paper was a tremendous book that taught me a lot about what occurs in this country and what we are owed. Would it be Neely Fuller? It could be Dick Gregory. We had a lot of master's teachers within the Black community, and we need to understand how important that history and that information is. Now, before I get hot and heavy here, I want to point out something, because there's a lot of things within the Asian community has been coming out. And for quite some time, Black people already knew, and I'm not speaking for every Asian person, I'm not stating that, but a lot of the racism within the Asian community, whether it be me going to Asia, the country, or the countries in Asia, or rather us going to Asian shops within the Black community. We've experienced racism plenty of times. But to flip the narrative that Black people are racist and this justifies their anti-Asian hate crime bill is ludicrous. It's a farce. It's false. It's wrong. But this is how the dominant society and people who are honorary white, so to speak, can attach themselves to the dominant society in order to keep Black people as the permanent underclass, whether it be criminal or economic, right? But this is something I want to show you guys very quickly here. Take a look at this.
Oh, shit.
This video right here, family, was very, very alarming because it's a group of Asian boys with one, I believe, Asian girl, and they're jumping this black girl. There's two black boys videotaping it. Then there's three other black boys from the side watching it as they are allowing these Asian teenagers, seems to be, jump this black girl. And know what's funny about that too, family? When I look at videos on YouTube, how black women go into these Asian nail shops and hair shops and all these places where they get things done. And some Asians, and I'm not speaking about every Asians, okay? I'm just speaking about those who have done these bad things to black people. Because it doesn't get highlighted. The only thing that gets highlighted is of a random black guy runs down the street of New York and hit an Asian, but that gets highlighted. But nonetheless, they lock the door on this black woman and they proceed to inflict violence on her. But no one else, which the shop is filled with black women, none of them come to her rescue. None of them tries to protect her, shield her, get in between the fight. No one does that. This is ridiculous. This is once again another story of us not protecting us when another class of people are putting harm upon us. This is absolutely ridiculous. I'm gonna let you see it one more time. I don't know if it pissed you the hell off, but it definitely pissed me the hell off. Here we go. Fighting all these Asian men and women, teenagers rather, and there's a black boy recording, and the person recording is black. Look at these three guys to the left. Right there, really quick. Seems to be two black guys and I guess another group of guys, but nonetheless, they let this sister fight all of those people as they're fucking recording. We got to do better, family. We got to do better. But I had to point that out. But let me get on with it here. Now, this story you can find on the worldwar.org, okay? And it is labeled Red Summer, okay? And Red Summer is very important to the story of these black towns underwater, is because back in 1919, as it states here, American servicemen returned from the First World War only to find a new type of violent conflict waiting for them at home. An outbreak of racial violence known as the Red Summer. And that's coined because of all the blood that was shed when it comes to Black Americans. As the Red Summer occurred in 1919, an event that affected at least 26 cities. And believe me, these cities were predominantly Black, meaning I don't mean that the population of that city was majority Black, but it was primarily Black when it comes to the ratio within that area. It says 26 cities across the United States. And I'm not going to read all this to you, family. I do have some highlights here. Again, we're talking about the Red Summer. I'm just going to jump down here because here's a town. It says neighborhood children raiding an African-American house after they were forced out during the 1919 Chicago race riots. So look at this house that they vandalized. And look how good these Black people were living back then, family. Okay, don't look at the broken out windows and because they destroyed it, right? These white teenagers destroyed this home. But look how nice that home was. So when people say we've always been poor, we've always been destitute, we always lived in dilapidated areas, that's very untrue. Black people actually used to live very well back in the day. But of course, in the system of white supremacy, that didn't last long. Okay, let me continue. A 4-day riot in Washington, D.C. began on July 19th when a rumor that Black men had assaulted a white woman incited mobs to attack local Black neighborhoods, right? So these Black men supposedly assaulted this white woman, but they went to the entire Black town and said and assault random African-American individuals on the street. That's what occurred to us, family. And this is the red summer. We're not even talking about the black towns underwater. They actually went out and rioted and destroyed our neighborhoods, our economic base because of a rumor. But Emmett Till, we have all these stories of how the black men or black women said something to a white person, or they raped her, or they assaulted her. Next thing you know, they're destroying everything we have. It also states here, Norfolk, Virginia, a parade celebrating the return of a unit of African American troops from the Europe turned into a bloody melee, and 2 black servicemen were killed. Right, and they coming back from the war. They survived the war and got killed when they came back home. What about this? It says massive race riot in Chicago. Rioting erupted on July 27 when a black teenager drowned after being hit with stones when he and friends drifted near a de facto whites-only beach. They even owned the beach back in the day, family, where it was a white beach and a black beach. And the kids were in the water. The teenager was in the water, and he drifted close to the borderline of the white beach, and they started stoning him from the shore while he was in the water, and he drowned. And it goes on to say the final Chicago casualty count listed 38 fatalities, 23 black, 15 white, 537 injured, and upwards of 1,000 black families made homeless by the burning and rampant destruction of African American neighborhoods. Family, 1,000 families was displaced. 1,000 families became homeless. But we got Negroes on the internet talking about, oh, reparations is education. Reparation is getting music contracts back. No, reparations, the first thing is cash payment. And you look at California and what they're doing, they're getting closer to paying people who suffered from stuff like the Red Summer, waters being on the town, discrimination, racism. They have a possibility to give up to $233,000 per person. $233,000 per person, but people still believe, and that's because the dominant society, unfortunately, knows how to use mass media as a weapon to fool the people and then encourage stupid Negroes that reparations is anything but cash payments. But when you look at the history of Black Americans in this country, not just the trope that we built the country, this, that, and the other, not even from that. Thinking about a people who came here in shackles and chains and whooped and tortured and burned and maimed and dismembered. All these things occurred to Black Americans. And when they released us from slavery, we started to build our own towns. Because some people like to believe that the only people who can really build are the Italians and the Mexicans. Who you think built this country? And so when they released us, we built our own homes on the land that we saved up and purchased for. And that's why when you hear a person like Marcel Dixon talking about getting our land back, because land was stolen. And when they couldn't steal the land, they destroyed the property that was on the land. And they came up with all these excuses why they were doing these things. And in this one incident in Chicago, 1,000 Black families became homeless. Here's another one. Elaine, Arkansas, on September 30th, October 1st, after a white law officer was killed in a shootout outside a Black sharecroppers gathering, Charles Ball ordered 500 Army soldiers from the nearby Camp Pike to march on Elaine and put down what was labeled an insurrection among the Black sharecroppers. They used Army soldiers to go fight farmers, to fight Black farmers. Estimate the how many African Americans were killed, but upwards of 200 are believed to have lost their lives. They went to go get 500 Army soldiers to go kill over 200 Black farmers. I'm going to start right there with the example of how we consistently get undermined, destroyed by the dominant society, unfortunately, I'm now going to move into a legal or professional term they would like to use in order to displace people or move you out of your home, so to speak. And that term is called development induced displacement. I see we got ADOS invented country. I know that's right. Absolutely. Yes. And I see Jermaine Anderson in the room, but we're going to cover this very quickly. Listen to this. It says here that some 10 million people worldwide are displaced or resettled every year due to development projects such as the construction of dams, irrigation schemes, urban development, transport, conservation of mining projects, blah, blah, blah. It says negative for most of the people who have to move, as well as for other people in the area, such as host population. People are often left socially and institutionally disrupted and economically worse off. And the reason why we was especially left economically worse off is because they did not give us the value of our homes when they did this particular development induced displacement, as they have done it. Now, in some cases, very few cases, Black people actually got a little bit money to move, but they never got the value of their property. They never got the value of their land. They never got the value of their house. But in order not to pay us money, in order to make us more destitute than we once were before, when we talk about development inducement displacement, we're talking about when local cities, towns, and states wanted to eradicate Black people from their land. They came up with development induced displacement, moved them out, barely gave them any money, if any at all. So a lot of them was left homeless, and they flooded the towns, family. They flooded the towns. Now, Amber Ruffin did an excellent piece. So I will not take away from her piece, but I will go here to TikTok and show a portion because she expertly broke this down. And I really want you guys to hear. So let me just blow this up just a little bit here, but I really want you guys to listen.
Familiar with the story of the Tulsa Race Massacre, where a white mob burned a vibrant Black community to the ground, which is crazy. Even crazier, dozens of other Black towns have been erased off the American map, not by burning them down, but by hiding them underwater. Don't know what I mean? Well, let's find out in a segment called How Did We Get Here?
Fair use, fair use.
This is Lake Lanier. It's a lake in Forsyth County, Georgia, where people go swimming and boating and fishing and do a bunch of other lakey things. But before it was Lake Lanier, it was a town called Oscarville, Georgia. Now, Oscarville was a thriving, predominantly Black community with a church, a school, and dozens of homes until the year 1912, when a very bad thing happened. Oh, two very bad things. In 1912, two Black teenagers were accused of rape. They were tried, convicted, and sentenced to death in a single day. And after they were executed, a mob of white men terrorized, drove out, or killed all the Black people in the surrounding area. And they did that until the entire Black community of Oscarville disappeared.
So, family, right there, nothing new. As I was reading you the story of Red Summer of 1919, she's literally repeating a story from 1912 where two Black men got accused of doing something to a white woman or saying something they shouldn't have said, right? And then they went and destroyed the town. And after they destroyed the town, they flooded the town. This is nothing new. I was speaking about 1919 Red Summer. She's talking about 1912.
The county went from having over 1,000 Black residents in 1912 to 0 in 1920. That story is so sad. It makes
so in 8 years, they wiped out the whole entire town.
After the Black community had been run off, the white people of Forsyth County said, you know what we could use? A big old lake. So they made one right where the town of Oscarville had just been. They flooded the area and literally covered up the entire town with water. This is what it looks like right now. But The town is still under there. The homes and churches and schools, they're still down there. And now people go boating on top of them. Compared to that, this is truly a rom-com. Now, you might be thinking, what a weird, isolated incident. But just like the rat who ate the pizza in the subway, this story is both crazy and common. Ever heard of Collegia, Alabama? It was once a thriving Black community with a Black college,
All
the
right.
first Black
So
railroad.
the sister did a wonderful piece, family. I just wanted to show you that. But we're going to go into a little more detail here very quickly, very quickly. Right. I went on I went on Twitter, and this is what I found here when I typed in Black towns underwater. This guy was stating how some towns back in the Netherlands and also in Zealand were flooded underwater. And I'm like, this doesn't even compare. This doesn't even compute. I'm going to tell you why. Look at the reason why these towns got flooded in New Zealand and also in Netherlands. These are or were fully underwater due to natural flooding, okay, the black dots, or military operations, white dots, including when the Allies flooded the area in World War II. So this is totally different than our experience, family, because we got things like this. There are also a dozen or so black towns buried underwater like Oscarville that are not included in this image. And they're talking about Oscarville, Georgia. But this is a map of black massacres that occurred in the United States. And like we say, Chicago, 1919. It should be in here a couple of more times because a lot of the Red Summer of 1919 happened in 26 cities. But family, this is just a small glance of what occurred to our people. For those Negroes who still don't think, oh, it was such a long time ago, then speak to people in the dominant society who benefits from generational wealth. Generational wealth is a real thing. And people can't even understand that having 40 or 50 acres and what you can do with that land outside of farming. Nowadays, with that much acreage, you can do so much. But nonetheless, I digress. Okay. It states here, we might even start seeing all the remnants from those black-owned towns that are underwater at the moment. Some of these towns has been revealed because inflation's up and I guess water's down. I don't know, but basically there's been droughts around the country. And so a lot of these cities and rock beds have been revealing statues, towns. And so this story is becoming more popular and more popular. Okay. But for us, our people, it was very, very tragic. Let me move on here. Now, Oscarville, Georgia. It states here, as the sister just was reading, Lake Lanier is a popular weekend destination known for fishing, boating, and so much more. Okay. So that's it. That is what this town is known for today. And it states here, a known fact is that it sits on top of a black town. And I'm just going to jump right down here, family. I know it's hard for you guys to see. It says Edwards was dragged out of jail, beaten with a crowbar, and then lynched from a telephone pole. Daniel and Knox went to trial and were found guilty on the same day. The boys were sentenced by death by hanging. Now, let me just read the sentence before that so you can get the context. Rob Edwards was arrested in September 1912 along the Ernest Knox and Oscar Daniel, both teenagers, all accused of raping and murdering a young white woman named Mae Crow. And if you notice, majority of these stories start off with we're being accused and arrested, something dealing with a white woman. I have no idea why that's always the case. Edwards was dragged out of jail, beaten with a crowbar, and then lynched from a telephone pole. Daniel and Knox. Now, all of these boys are teenagers, black teenagers. Daniel and Knox went to trial and were found guilty on the same day. They did the trial, they did the sentencing, they did everything on the same day. The boys were sentenced to death by hanging. They did all of that on the same day. They found them guilty on the same day and they hung them on the same day. It stated after the trials and executions, white men known as night riders That's the name they got for that car, Knight Rider. Forced black families out of their homes by bringing their land, churches, and schools. They burned their land, churches, and schools. It says once the black families fled, Lake Lanier was built on top of what was buried down. And you have other stories like Koala, or now today Benson, Alabama. Okay. And let me just kind of scan it. This is a slave story here. Seneca Village in New York City. Okay. It says by the 1840s, half of the Black American community who lived there owned their own property. Listen to this again, family, because people don't think we ever did anything in America, that we never owned anything, that we didn't have businesses, that we didn't build this country, and that we're not owed reparations. Fools. But it states here by the 1840s. Listen to this. Don't forget what happened I digress. By the 1840s, half of the African Americans who lived there owned their own property. Owned their own property. A rate 5 times higher than the city average as reported in the timeline. Okay. 1857, Seneca Village was torn for the construction of Central Park. The only thing that remained is a commemorative plaque dedicated in 2001 to the Lost Village. So think about that, family. You own property, and because they want to build a park, and this town, this city is majority black, and half of them own their own property. And if you don't think that's by design, then you've been living on the rock for the past fucking 30, 40 years. Excuse my language, but it doesn't make sense that I keep hearing people who are Black Americans, allegedly, that we are not owed reparations, and they're not coming up even with a cash payment. They're talking about all these other weird, quote unquote, beneficial things they believe that's going to help the Black community. Well, like I said before, they say, what do reparations look like? I said, you go, you study, you research Native Americans reparations. They have their own bureau. They have part of the federal budget. Let's get that. Let's get monthly stipends. Let's get our land back like you gave them. And if we can't get that same land here today because of whatever reason, give us the equivalency of that land. So if you want to know what reparations is, let's monitor after that. But the first thing is cash payments. Just like California's doing, a big lump sum. Yeah, it doesn't stop there. But I'll move on, family. I'll move on. It says Susanna was also flooded by Lake Martin. Okay, this is another black city. It says, according to Alabama Living, more than 900 bodies were moved from the cemetery before the land was submerged. The town once included a gold mine, a school, a grist mill, a flour mill, a salt mill, and a blacksmith shop and a church. Vanport, Oregon is another popular one. Okay, it says here, World War II saw white males drafted to serve overseas. A labor shortage pulled in a great migration of black from the South. With soldiers being drafted overseas to fight in the war, Oregon was a labor shortage. This resulted in a great migration of Black Americans from the South. Now, this is Oregon. These new workers needed places to live, as the Urbana neighborhood was the only place where Black people could live legally, right? So in Oregon, it was very racist. And to this point, there's a lot of racism that still occur in Oregon, but nonetheless, they could only live in one town. It said it became too small for the growing population of Black Americans, and Vanport was built as a temporary housing solution. It states that at its peak, 40,000 residents, or 40%, were Black American. But then in 1948, massive flooding erupted in the neighborhood, and city officials didn't warn residents of the dangerously high water levels. Many didn't evacuate in time, meaning that the city failed to alarm those residents. The town was wiped out within a day. 18,500 families was displaced, more than a third Black American. Today, that area is known as Delta Park. Okay. So that's just a couple of stories of the atrocities that we have been through as a people. And the reason why a lot of us transcend the harm, the pain, the things that occur to our Black American family is because we know the reason why we as a group are on the bottom. Most of us we kind of know, even if you can't articulate it, right? Even if you don't have a vast lexicon, but a lot of us kind of know why we are where we are. But that's no excuse. See, there's a two front battle here where you have to get on your grind, do the things for you and your family, but you should also be stumping the ground for reparations in the form of cash payments initially. That's the first thing. Okay, because when we look back over and over and over again, and people get tired of the slave talk. Okay, so let's bring it to a time where Black men and women were mostly together in a marriage, had kids, built businesses, built cities, built towns, thriving, prominent, high middle class Black neighborhoods. And why don't you see that today? You might see one or two when you go to certain areas in Houston. But why don't you see it in all these cities that we covered? Why don't you see that today? That's because they were systematically destroyed. As I told you back in 1919, Red Summer, 26 Black American towns were destroyed, burned, and people were killed. How does that happen all in 1 year? It's systematic, it's by design. Then when we talk about all the Black towns underwater, if you look at each of these stories, they're very sketchy and very fraudulent because there's always somebody was accused or arrested but never found guilty by a juror of their peers. But anyway, look at your notes here. I guess people are just watching this evening. But nonetheless, family, I just want to point that out to you. And for those Negroes and those hoes and whoever it may be, speak out against reparation. Understand what your ancestors, your forefathers went through in order for the small freedoms, not even freedoms, little small, I guess, the ability to move around and what they have died for and what they were trying to build. But the system of white supremacy destroyed it. So you guys have a good night. Enjoy your Monday Night Football. I'll talk to you guys on the next. I'm out.